ado, let's get into it, Perry. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everybody. So this is very strange. I'm a professor at the graduate school, but this is very different. It feels very official with these microphones and stuff. So I'll try. I'm used to either being in classrooms or doing pitch. I do a lot of pitches over Zoom. So I'm going to try to transition back to reality space again. And so forgive me here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the films I love. Why I love filmmaking. Also walk you through the production of my first feature film. Which was this big dividing line for my career. It sort of launched my career and got me my management and stuff like that. It was made for only technically $5,000, but it was also 2.5 years of work while I worked a full-time job editing it and doing all this other stuff. So that's sort of a fake number, even though it's technically true. So I'll talk about the film itself, but I'll also use it to talk about low budget and no budget filmmaking, and hopefully talk about some stuff of the things that we went through to be useful to you all making your own films. Some things that we did that worked really well, some things that we did that were really not a good idea. Taking the decade of experience and sort of bringing it here to you all so that you can learn from our mistakes and successes. So one fun thing today, a company recently acquired the Blu-ray rights to the movie, and so we've been putting together all these behind the scenes and stuff like that. No one has ever seen them before, so very exciting. I don't know if it's exciting. You all will be the first to see any of this behind the scenes stuff and stuff that has us directing stuff. It's also pretty embarrassing. I think if you take nothing else from this, is that you'll see some of this stuff and be like, oh, if these guys can make a movie, I can make a movie. So that's partly what this is about. All right. Ooh, blank one. Look at that. Animated. All right. What do I love about filmmaking? So many things. I think it's changed over the years. When I was in high school making movies or when I was in college, I think the thing that I loved the most it was extremely sort of instinctual and emotional. I didn't realize at the time, but pretty dyslexic. So even though I kind of wanted to be a writer, I wasn't that good at it, which is ironic because now I get paid to write stuff. I guess, Grammarly and stuff helps. But at the time, it felt so great to be able to have these things in my head and in my heart, and to be able to make something and then other people see them. And that ability to sort of communicate what was going on inside of me and make it external was really important when I was younger. And then I think the older I got, what I love about filmmaking now is two parts. The first is really simple, which is just making something you care about with people you like. It's just, I don't know if anybody plays sports, but when it's really going great on a sports ball team and you just feel this rush and this sort of collective, or like when you're at a big dance party and it's all sort of flow state thing with others, like that's when filmmaking's really going. It feels sort of transcendently awesome. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is the more I do it, it feels less and less about me and less like, hey guys, look at this thing I made, which was like a lot of undergrad, and more sort of, it's sort of more like when, you've discovered this cool restaurant that no one knows about and you're talking to your friends and you're like, oh my God, you have to see this awesome restaurant. No one knows about it. And you get really excited to like share this thing that you think is awesome. So it's just like the restaurant. It's not really about you as much and more about just this cool sort of collective dream that you are excited to share with others. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the filmmakers that inspired me and sort of, especially when I was in college, because I think that might be relevant, and then jump into the feature, the sort of trailer and stuff like that. Major influences. So first, Bergman, specifically this film, Through a Glass Darkly, for two reasons. One, the spider scene from this, like when I watched his films, I got the same feeling when I read Virginia Woolf or Tolstoy or something, where I was just in the presence of a mind that was much smarter than me and much wiser than me about life. And that was really cool because I think I'd been mostly watching kind of big movies before this, and there was so much intelligence about the human condition. The spider scene from this film really screwed me up too, the wallpaper scene. But also, I saw this amazing behind-the-scenes moment with the Bergman crew on Winter Light, where these famous actors are there doing a scene, and then there's a buzzing sound, and they don't turn off the camera. So you see these famous actors, instead of being like, oh, well, call me when it's ready, they're like, where could that be coming from? Is it up there? Maybe it's some of the vents. And you see these like famous people wandering around set trying to figure out what's going on. And I realized it was just him and his like 8 buddies on an island during the summer making a movie together. And I thought, that was his life? That's amazing. Like, he doesn't transition to Marvel movies. He just does that all the time. I thought that was the greatest thing I could think of. So that was a big inspiration, both the movies themselves and his method of production. Fish Tank blew me away when I saw it, and it was the start of me getting really obsessed with sort of neorealism, but not sort of Godard, where it's very aesthetically obsessed. It's more just like finding non-actors, finding real places, and mixing documentary and narrative together. This actress was found on the street by Andrea Arnold, and I think this was the debut of, oh my gosh, the famous Scottish good-looking guy. Fassbender, yes.
Good job.
So really, really great film. And the exciting thing about it, the third act jackknifes the film in a direction. And it's so rare that you're watching a movie and you're like, I have no idea what's going to happen next. Absolutely no idea. And this film achieved that in the final act. And so I sort of took that to heart. Miyazaki, this may be my favorite movie ever, Spirited Away. And I don't even really know why, other than it feels like the closest I've ever experienced to have a dream, like be watching a dream of some kind. Yeah, it's just hypnotic and scary and so incredible, and I really recommend it. But also be ready, because it's really strange and kind of upsetting in a lot of different ways. Mononoke is great. All of his films are really great. But the amount of imagination and care he takes in the films has just, I mean, I love all of Ghibli's work. Mike Flanagan, as a more recent one, when I was making this film, I'd never made a horror movie before. I actually made a musical for my major graduate film. And it wasn't even supposed to be a horror film. It was just supposed to be a drama about 2 young men going through a tough time. But as I researched mental illness and a bunch of other stuff, it just got scarier and scarier, because I tried to be true to the experiences of the characters. But I saw Mike Flanagan's Absentia, which is his first film that he made for about 50 grand with friends and family. And I never knew a genre film could have so much. It was so scary, but it was also had so much heart and humanity to it. And I didn't know those you could have both of those in the same film before. And he became a little bit of a mentor. We hung out. I hung out on Dr. Sleep. And the show I sold through Netflix was through his company. That was sort of like Haunting of Hill House. It was very family oriented, but with some scary stuff. He's a really good guy. I was on his set. I was hanging out with the crew, and they were all like, I'm never going to work with another director. It's just like, I used to work at Blumhouse. It was terrible. And now I just sign up for whatever he's doing, because that's like, and that's the sort of ethos he has with filmmaking, is like you bring along the same people over and over again, and you create this sort of community. It's like Bergman again,
Yes,
but
I was going to say.
but bigger.
Yep.
Yeah. And last, Chloe. Chloe is a classmate, and we used to write together. Also, Shaka King is a classmate. We had a good year that year. But especially her first film, Songs My Brothers Taught Me, I read about 10 drafts of that. And she's the real deal. First of all, she's unbelievably talented. But second of all, and she's the hardest worker I've met, but she also just commits to whatever world she's in 1,000,000,000%. So she made Songs My Brothers Taught Me, which was casting non-actors, living in an Indian reservation, or a Native American reservation for a while, and just becoming friends with everybody there, legitimate friends, and living with them and building a movie around their lives. And if you haven't seen The Rider, it's unbelievable. It's her second film. I liked it better than, Nomadland's great, but I liked The Rider even more. But she's a really committed artist, and again, this melding of narrative and documentary and sort of weaving the two together, I find incredible. Now that just feels like a greatest hits.
Yeah.
All right, I'll try to speed through these, because these are very random, and I tried to pick things that maybe are a little different, and so yeah, I think you'll see what I mean in a second. So, Bambi. When I was little, the Disney Renaissance was coming out, and like you forget, I think those films in my head were always made sort of, just had always existed somehow, and then when I got older, I realized it was just people in boardrooms making them, and it's kind of remarkable how good some of those movies are. And The Hero's Journey feels very old pat right now, and it needs a lot of revising. But when I was young, these movies were so frightening and so amazing, and they made me laugh and cry, and they really were very good at what they were trying to do, I think. So that was a big inspiration. It just felt like I could fall into this other world. And a lot of inspiration when I was very little. Let the Right One In is another big film that I didn't. It's a scary movie. This is the original one. It's a coming-of-age story about two young people, and it's also a pretty frightening vampire film. But I didn't know that those two things could combine to make each of them stronger. The vampire film gave the coming-of-age story teeth, and the coming-of-age story gave the vampire film heart, and it made something that I think was better than either of the two things solo. And that had a really big impact on me. It's an amazing film if you haven't seen it. I couldn't think about anything other than this film when I watched it in undergrad. And Spike was a professor at NYU, and he was great. The thing I admired about him was how he just could never make something without so much meaning and purpose behind it. And he was just this really driven sort of bullet train going towards stuff that mattered to him. This film it's amazing how prophetic it is. It's unbelievable. It's really, really good, especially for... I had never been to New York when I saw this, and it was very inspiring in that way as well. This film, I think that at the time I had never... This is one of those where I was like, you can do that? You can film like that? You can shoot things in this way? I don't know if anyone's seen this, but this, at the time, was shot in this radical way where the filmmaking style was so visceral and documentary style. I had never seen anything like it, and I couldn't believe that films could be made like this. And the only films that I'd seen like this were very quiet, sort of independent films, but there was this melding of... I don't know, the cameras were getting smaller, people were getting more daring, and this was a very exciting direction that I think I started to get really interested in this sort of direction. Okay, so that's the greatest hits. Yes, the film we'll be talking about is called They Look Like People. A story of love, loyalty, and living nightmares. And let me see if I can get my log line here. Suspecting that those around him are actually malevolent shapeshifters, a troubled man questions whether or not to protect his only friend from an impending war or from himself. So like I said, it wasn't supposed to be a... Oh, this is actually kind of fun. No one ever noticed this because this was the original poster. But if you look real closely here, this isn't the billing block. It's just... Listen very carefully. Oh. They're all around us and da-da-da-da-da.
Nice.
Because we only made it just the three of us, so we could do whatever we wanted. Anyway, so I'm going to show you the trailer, and then talk a tiny bit more, and then show you the first 3 minutes. And for the rest of the time, I'm going to show a total of 3 clips from the film, the beginning, a sort of fun one, and a sort of serious one, where there's a lot of directing actors involved. And then show you a little bit of behind the scenes of those 3 films on sort of how the sausage was made a little bit, with some discussion about how the film came about and things like that. So this is the trailer. Let's see if this works.
You are a mountain. You are 100 miles high. All that your enemies place in your way, betrayal, lies, poison, you devour and become stronger. You are invincible. Those that try to hurt you will turn silent and will bow down. But what can people do to hurt a mountain.
Yeah, and so 2 fun facts. One, the voice was a coworker of mine that I convinced to just do that during work one time. And the song was my sister and her boyfriend, then boyfriend, now husband, and their friend in a stairwell in Chicago singing a bunch of things.
Wow.
And then just me messing with it for a very long time to try to get something kind of creepy. So this should hopefully give you an idea of the kind of truly homemade quality of this, which we'll get into in a sec. So the next part is just the first 3 minutes, which I think gives a pretty good overview of the kind of style and feel of the film, which will, I think, inform some of the other things we talk about a little bit later. So that's the first 3 minutes, and I think it gives you a basic idea. It's a little bit scary, creepy, with some sort of bubbling tension underneath, but it's mostly about this friendship between these 2 young men who are both struggling in different parts of their life. So the film premiered at Slamdance, and then it won some awards, and then it sort of went from there. But the whole, that was like a sort of a 3-year journey, something like this. And at the beginning, it was just these 2 friends of mine. We used to make movies in college. I had been a few years out trying to make things, and we just, we sort of decided we're making a movie no matter what. And then I bought them plane tickets to come to my apartment for a month before I had a script. And I had a different script at one point about, I think it was about a cult, because cults are everything. And then I ditched it, I think on Christmas Day, and we were shooting in February, so I had a month to just figure something out. But for anyone that wants to make a big project like this, I recommend this system because I procrastinate a lot, but I also get so, like, I care what my friends think a lot. And so it's like I pitted my procrastination against the shame of my friends showing up in my apartment with nothing to shoot, and the shame won. It was very effective. I recommend it if you're. It's sort of like not giving yourself a way to back out in some ways. What do I love about shooting and directing? So a lot of things. I shot the film myself. I crewed on a sort of several dozen films after school, a lot of theses and stuff, and I think one of the big things that always frustrated me was the sort of percentage of every day that was spent on doing the passenger van and dealing with the people, and someone's, girlfriend just broke up with them, so they're sad, and then we have to organize this, and like lighting for one direction and stuff. It took up about 70% of the day. 10% was sort of other things, and then 20% was actually directing and telling a story with the actors, and that drove me crazy. So a lot of the goal with this was to try to flip those percentages as much as I could. One of the ways that we did that was pick locations where you could create sort of a stage rather than just a single good shot. So you could use dimmers and turn up and down lights, not have any C-stands, to create sort of a bunch of places where you could do improv and create little pocket scenes without having to spend 30 minutes or an hour and a half resetting everything each time. So the next scene is a very tiny little scene, but it's one of the, it sort of, I think illustrates what I like about this method. So we'll see it. It's where the sort of love story is starting in the movie a little bit between Christian's character and his boss, Mara. So they just go for a walk. They're at work, but they're going for a walk at lunch. Okay, so that's it. Oh, and then goes to the next scene. So this was the first time those two people had ever met, and we just created a few improv games for them, and I knew that Margaret had used to do judo with Ronda Rousey when she was younger, and I was like, oh, we got to write that into the script somehow. So it's like if you write for actors that you know, you can, you know, if one of them is really good at juggling or a great singer or a ballet dancer, you can weave it into the script and it's really great. So we just created a series of sort of improv scenarios for them, and one of them was her teaching him judo and actually flipping him. And that's just a bunch of improv that the actors brought to it, and it was really fun. Although we actually had to replace their sound after she flipped him the first time, because all of us behind the camera were like, oh my God, we didn't know that was actually going to happen. But it's a great example of writing to the strengths of what you have and using the cool reality that's there and making the most out of it rather than trying to impose like a top-down thing. So that was a lot of fun, and I think it worked really well for the movie because it really brought the two characters together really, really quickly because it was so intimate so fast.
Can I just ask really quick? For sound, for something like this, I noticed, you know, we were in a wider shot. So how did you have them on lavs? Did you have, you know?
Yes, they were both on lavs, which you could, sometimes there was some scratchy and we had to deal with that. We didn't have a sound person, which was one of the biggest issues. We had a stand, like a $10 Amazon stand with a boom that over some things.
Yep.
But for that, it wasn't very good, so we had to rely on lavs. Probably not having a sound person was probably one of the biggest challenges of shooting. But yeah, that's how we survived that one.
Thanks.
Okay, so this, I mean, it was really scary. Like, I've made a ton of movies. I made a bunch in graduate school and in college and in high school and middle school, but it's always, first of all, there's tons of pressure. And second of all, you're creating the visual language. You've never heard these characters. You have no idea who they are. It's very intimidating. And so I really recommend shooting something pretty easy your first day, because you're all trying to figure out what the vibe is still and not sort of, so the first day was pretty easy. But I do have a little bit of some behind the scenes stuff that I'm going to play now. And the talking on it was so inane for those that don't. This is the special edition Blu-ray for people that probably already know and like the movie. So I'm just going to talk over it because it's just me talking about how tired I am and stuff. You also get to see my face when I was much younger. You too will grow old, everybody. And just so this is what the beginning of the production was like. It's like 3 minutes of just footage of us sort of scrambling to figure out the production about 2 weeks beforehand. And again, this is like, if these guys can do it, we can do it. So, it's the first day ideally shouldn't be that scary because there's been so much prep time. The goal is to sort of reduce decision-making processes on the day so you can only deal with the things that really matter rather than. The worst thing is having to make a lot of tough decisions in the moment rather than having thought about it a lot beforehand. The biggest surprise. So I think probably that it got really personal for all of us, which I don't think we expected. Some of us were all kind of going through stuff that was similar to the characters a little bit, but we were setting out to kind of make a genre film, but I don't think we realized until afterwards that it was a very exaggerated, extreme version of us, because none of us had ever had a sort of underwent any psychoses or any of these sorts of things. So it was not what happened to us, but some of the underlying stuff about how to be courageous or a man or an adult or what to do with failure or, you know, you can trust people or not, like really. It's sort of after you finished it sort of freaked us out that it felt like, and this is why it's sometimes tough to talk about because it's sort of like half a film and half a journal entry. So the next scene I'm going to show you is not the finale of the film, but it's sort of around the end of Act 2, so sort of the main all is lost crisis kind of moment. And in the script, it was sort of, like a genre scene where like there was sort of a fight of some kind. But the more we rehearsed it and the more we did it, a bunch of stuff got cut and it got changed and it became kind of intense. So we're gonna watch this and then the aftermath of it, and then I think you'll see what I mean with it. Let's see. Okay, so it's about 3 minutes, I think. So Wyatt has been seeing things, thinks that there's a war coming, and has been hiding this from Christian the whole time. He's been building armaments in the basement, but finally he's sort of letting him know what's going on. And Mara had just come over, but Wyatt had freaked her out, talking about the resistance and the monsters and things like this, so she's run away. There's a little bit more, but it was when we started rehearsing it didn't suddenly feel like the scene in the movie where the crazy guy tells it got, I don't know, more serious than that and about bigger things, about like how to be a good person, stuff like that. So that scene I think will be useful because I'm going to show you a rehearsal from that in a second. The toughest thing, no sound guy or sound person, was really, really hard. And editing took so long. I was working full time and I was editing for my job. So I finished my job at 6:30 and then I just stayed there until I got too tired and went home. And I did that. I mean, there was sort of about 1.5 years of that because we had I did all the mixing myself, all the color, things like that. And I think that was great, but also tough. And it was not because I'm amazing, it was because of money. And so that it's sort of like my colleagues, I told them after finishing the movie, they were like, "We made a movie," and I was like, "No, we didn't." It's like we shot a movie,
right?
But that's like going through the woods, and now we're at the base of a mountain, and now it's climbing the mountain, and then there'll be another false peak, and then another mountain. So editing, I think, was definitely the hardest part. The other hardest part was just me and the actors. And so when something little went wrong, like in the final scene, there are these little pink gloves, and they kept breaking. And when we ran out of pink gloves, we were just like, we gotta go get more pink gloves. We can't shoot anymore. So we had to spend an hour going to some store to get pink gloves because there was no one else, and that was pretty terrible. So sometimes having a little bit more human power is amazing. This is another somewhat humorous example. This is the entire crew doing. So this is what I mean about creating a stage. This is the basement. The last 10 minutes of the movie is set in this basement, but a lot of scenes are set here. And I'm like an insane person going through and playing every role and every scene to see how the lighting would look like. But if it wasn't just me, I could look at someone doing this, but instead I have to do it all and then film myself and then look at it retrospect. So in addition to looking totally crazy, it just takes a lot of time. Anyway.
But it's worthwhile.
Yes, it's really worthwhile. I mean, it's great because you can have a whole stage where you turn things on and turn things off. And you don't have to reset every time. It ended up working really well. The preparation really paid off. Did it change your blocking when you were going to block the actors at all? Or did you stick to it? Or so about blocking, I think that I gaffed one time for Bradford Young, who's now very famous. He was a real.
I love him.
Well, anyway, he was quite a character, but he with his lighting, he did this really smart thing where his lighting was mostly blocking. So he worked with the director to just find pools of light that made logical sense, like around a kitchen table or by a window, and then worked with the director to find places that people could naturally be and sort of, rather than trying to create the blocking and then light that, it was sort of a dance between what was realistic and where there was light and the performance, and sort of finding some nice middle ground between those two.
Beautiful, thank you.
Craziness. So source of inspiration, a friend of mine had gone through a period in his life where he was taking some medication, and it was sort of like, it was this one really bad week where a bunch of bad things happened to him in addition, and I think that he told me afterwards that if it wasn't for people close in his life, that he could have sort of gone up the deep end a little bit. And so I wanted to make a film about that 1 week in someone's life that sort of would make or break them, and between these two young men. But also it was this shot that had it was a nightmare I had, and then sort of happened to me one time when I was with my partner looking over, and this sort of extreme unknowability of the people that you're very close to. So this is some behind the scenes of this. At one point it gets a little bit loud, but it's not like a jump scare or anything. So do you work yourself or hire people for color? This was all me, and again, not because I think I'm amazing, but because of money. I mean, it is really wonderful to, I teach students in graduate school to know enough of this, because otherwise, it's really terrible to be too dependent on others. And a lot of my friends have been waited for years for producer, waited more years for money, and more years for all these other things to come together. And some of them are still waiting a decade out of film school to make their first feature. And so the idea of like learning what you can and what you absolutely can't, getting a friend to teach you or something, just means that you don't have to be beholden to other people. And so if you can keep it in the family, keep it within the sort of creative circle of yours. Like when producing, the one thing I was really bad at was like legal stuff, SAG paperwork, insurance claims, things like that. So I got my friend to help me do that. And festivals I also wasn't that good about, so I called a bunch of friends who had done it. And so if you can keep it within, rather than having to hire like randoms, keep it within your kind of group, it makes a really big difference. For this one, so the last thing I'll show you is just a little bit more behind the scenes that will show 3 scenes. 1 is an alternative take, and 2 is like me directing the actors. So you'll see sort of some of the directions that I give in between, just so you can see, what this is like. The next thing is what's next. Another film we sold, we just signed, I think officially last week for the 3rd feature. I think it's coming out in the fall. It looks like this. This is a poster that's never before been seen, because it's still in the early stages. But it's similar sort of crews and stuff, and similar way of doing it. A few more collaborators. My main job, other than being a professor, is it's weird, a salesman right now. I have a 120 slide pitch that I'm preparing with an executive from Aggregate, who did Ozark, those guys. Yep. That I'm pitching this week, and then there's another big deck that I'm pitching my agents the following week, and then a movie, and it's mostly pitching. So if you are teaching pitching, it's important, even though
next semester.
Even if it's the worst. I used to hate it, and now it's actually kind of fun. It's like that same restaurant thing where like, guys, this is so great. Like, if you don't like it, it's fine. I think it's awesome. You have to sort of get in the right mindset. And I think the last thing in the 2 minutes before questions, is the 3 sort of takeaways. There's all sorts of advice that I can give you, which may not be useful. But I think the 3 big things that made a big difference, big impact to me, is that when I was at film school, we were still kind of taught the way things were done in the 70s a little bit. And I think a lot of film literature is still stuck on that. Absolutely. And I think a lot of the podcasts you hear, like, I knew an actress that was on a movie with a let's see, what can I disclose here? A very famous person. And when you listen to the podcast, it seems like it all was like awesome, perfectly orchestrated, and all was sort of perfect. But actually, half of it was made up in the moment and done in reshoots and super haphazard and weird, and sort of they barely pulled it off. And so I think the one sort of piece of information that I want to share is that there's a million different ways to make a film, and you can make a film the way that you want to make it. So if you like, it's like a party. It's like how you want to have your birthday party. If you want to rave with 1 million people, amazing. If you want 3 people sitting around doing tarot cards, that's also amazing. It's totally up to you. And base it off how you want to make the film rather than what you think how a movie is supposed to be made. The second one is, if you're supposed to write what you know, maybe, film what you have. So it's like, do you have a friend who's a very charismatic lead singer of a band, or a cousin who works in an alpaca farm, or something awesome? And then find something you love within the world around you, because there's, New York has $8 trillion billion worth of production design. that's there for free if you want to use it. And I talk a lot about if you look at the writer Chloe's film, it won a Best Cinematography award, but it cost 80 grand, and it was because of the faces and the places she used. So you don't have to be. Money doesn't necessarily help. Money can be extremely helpful, but if you're smart and you work with what you have rather than try to impose your reality on the world, you'll get way more out of your movies. And the last thing is, instead of, and this is a little controversial, so there's going to be pushback on this, but instead of focusing on the goal you want, like to make an awesome movie and get into Sundance, focus on the experience you want to have. So like, I wanted to work with these folks to make a movie we loved, and that worked for us this time. But find your people, find your actors, producers, colleagues, other creatives that you can sort of work with. I have never met a filmmaker that has succeeded by themselves. Chloe had her Molly, who was another classmate, who produced all of her films, as well as her boyfriend Josh, who shot all of her films. Both of them went to NYU. But even before that, there was tons of script readings with colleagues and screenings that we had before she even submitted it. So making films and making art, I feel like there's this myth that it has to be like terrible for it to be good. You have to be like suffering and really late nights and people have to like get divorced and stuff. And it really doesn't have to be like that if you don't want it to be. If you like that stuff, because you're like super hardcore, that's great. But it doesn't have to be like that. I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be like that. And that's the end. So we have some time for questions.
Questions, please. Who's got a question? Keegan and then Ray.
How do you know if a certain shot, decision, or piece of writing is like genuinely good quality? Does it just feel good, or does it have to like follow a form of criteria?
Oh man, great question. It's very existential. We joke at grad school about I desired all throughout grad school a machine that I could put my script into, and it would take some time and spit out a number of how good it was. Because I just want to know if it's like, is it decent? And I still don't know, man. Like our second movie we loved and didn't do as well as our first, and we're I think still sort of confused by that. I think one thing that helps create a nice moat around it a little bit is having creatives you really trust that are your colleagues. That helps a lot. It's tough because if you make it, so I'll give you two things that I think might be useful here. One, it's more malleable than you think. So I made a musical, and I screened it for 80 people because we were doing, we were revising it at school, and there was no laughter, and it was a comedy. And I thought that I had made the worst movie of all time. And then I changed the title because it didn't have a title. And the title went like da-da-da-da-da, and then there was like a few little fanfare at the beginning, and then I screened basically the same cut, and everybody laughed the whole time. So it may not be bad or good. There may just be some small things you need to rearrange, basically. And then I think it's really tough. I think the best answer I have is okay, so the second example is I have a friend who's writing a novel, and she's been through some really dark stuff in her life, and it's a genre novel, but she's sort of working it in there. And she says that in some of her writer groups, they're scared to criticize the things that that relate to trauma that she's had, that is really bad stuff. But we're so close to her that she's like, I want you all to tell me if this feels manipulative or fake or whatever. But it's only because there's so much trust and respect that we've had for the last decade that we can have that sort of conversation. So keep your friends close with this stuff, I would say, is the best advice there.
Excellent. Ray?
From the trailer and from the clips that we watched, I could tell that sound was very important. How you use sound. In your production process, or pre-production, did you have an idea of what sounds you wanted before you went? And also for like the music, the scoring, did you seek to make custom music for it, or was it just things that you were able to find that were, I guess, copyright?
Yeah, good question. So we had some very strict film school professors that disallowed music for a long time, which I think helped because music can music is like really strong spice where
Yeah.
it's really great, but it can also totally overwhelm everything else very, very quickly. So I had just seen Anya Marquardt, who was another classmate who won Berlin with a film called She's Lost Control that was really good, and it had no music. And there was another film called Starred Up that I think had no music that I had just seen. And there's something so uncomfortable about no music because no one's telling you how to think or feel. And I thought that was sort of the challenge that I gave myself. I ended up doing a little bit of choir from my sister just to create a tiny bit of moments of like relaxation in there. And then as the sound design, I just did a ton of research into schizophrenia. And one story, there was a guy that in his head, whenever he heard the devil was nearby, he heard the sound of buzzing flies. And I thought that was the scariest thing I'd ever heard. So I used buzzing flies, bees, maggots crawling, I think some other buzzy sorts of sounds, and sort of layered them all in. Later we used a screaming tea kettle, and then those heaters, the sort of old heaters that sort of scream or make all those weird sounds.
Ones. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we just tried to find things that we found scary and we also, I mean, look, there was Fiona Apple songs in this originally. A lot of it is Hot Knife, I think, was in the montage at one point. There was some disastrous choices you make. So a lot of it is experimentation. That opening scene, I had an office for my work, and I just brought in colleagues, every few days. It was like, can I test this on you? And we figured out if we took away the ticking, and we did a few other things to create a lot of tension. So a lot of it is sort of psychological experimentation.
Did you hand it off to a mixer in the end, or no you mixed the whole
Which
thing?
is why the mix is medium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, we got to do what we got to do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, that was a great question. Somebody else? Any other questions out there? Are we all good? Yes, go ahead, please.
What was kind of your process before starting writing your film, and then kind of planning it out once you got to that production stage?
Oh man. So I think the writing process was when you have a good log line. I hate sounding like an executive now, but I think that it was more like you just with your creative colleagues, you tell it to a bunch of people, and if we didn't know if it was going to work or not, but we kept working it, and when we discovered the third act, then we started to tell people about it, and they were like, oh my God. Then we were like, okay, so now it's ours to mess up, basically, because it's a good enough idea that it can hold water unless we screw it up. And then the production process for us, it was taking the moment they started to come there and then working backwards from that moment with exactly what needed to happen each day prior to that. But I think one thing I can say is all the locations we had total access to the whole time, which was so helpful because it's really terrible to lose a location. The actors were all pretty good friends of mine, so that was also great because we couldn't lose them. And the camera I borrowed from a friend, so we couldn't lose that. So it's creating backups and moats around yourself there's this systems theory, I think, where if an AI plotted your flights, it would give you 15 minutes between like 4 flights. And that is either the most effective route or leads to total disaster. Mm-hmm. And so it's about giving yourself like a solid 2 hours between flights and organizing things so that you give yourself like a moat, basically.
Excellent, good questions. Well, can you all give a round of applause to Perry, please? Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming.